We meet again in another edition of Economic Forum where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. My name is John Masuku. Every 10 years, the government of Zimbabwe carries out a census which is managed by the Zimbabwe Statistical Agency, or ZimStats, in order to determine how many people there are in the country, and also looks at various demographics in order to be able to plan for the future and other things that may be required by our stakeholders. So today we would like to unpack some of the issues that have already come out from the 2022 census. These are coming out in bits and pieces as preliminary reports, but we'll discuss what is available so far, and we've invited an economist, Tafadzwa Chikumbu, who is going to be helping us to do that. Tafadzwa, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you so much, John.
Yes.
Good evening, Zimbabwe.
I've said something about the importance of a census. Maybe you want to elaborate on that, why it is important to carry out a census over and above what I've just mentioned.
A census is very important. It is a very important source of information that guides the government of Zimbabwe, information that guides the academia in terms of their research, information that can also help development partners. You know, when you have information coming from a census, you are actually able to determine how to place your interventions. Like the preliminary results that we have so far, it actually speaks to an increase in the population, the general population of Zimbabwe, from about 12 million to around 15 million. So that's a 16% increase in population. So with that in mind, you know, the government's interventions should actually be premised on the current figures that we are now looking at. So without that, the government was actually basing its interventions on the 2012 statistics. So a census is a very important source of information or data or information or statistics that can be used for any particular intervention. You know, with the development partners, for instance, when they want to make interventions in our country, they need to know the size of our population in our different geographical areas. They also need to know the population is probably divided in terms of gender or sex, how many are women, how many are men.
And besides the development partners and government, business industry also wants to know who is who and what's happening out there, because they are also selling their products. They also want to set up, and there are also investors who want to know where are we investing, who is there. Isn't that also important?
Yes, precisely. You know, investors, even before they come into Zimbabwe, they need to know the population size of our country. They also want to know the population in Harare, in Bulawayo, and any other province, so that when they come and invest, they know that they are customers where they are actually investing.
Let's look at the major highlights of the 2022 census, things that came out. We've already mentioned the movement of the figures of the population, but generally, what other factors or what other issues came out?
Okay, so like I've said, our population increased by around 16%, from around 12 million to 15 million. And of that population, the majority are women. And but what I've also figured out is that you know, women are more in all the provinces, but we also have specific or particular districts which do have more men than women. So it's the general overview that projects that women are more than men across the provinces. But actually, yet we do have also districts that have more men than women. So I think that is very important to note. And I also realized that the majority of Zimbabweans, they live in the rural areas. So for the 2012 census, the rural population was around 67%, but currently it sits at around 61%. And I think that particular statistics actually speaks a lot, whether in terms of rural to urban migration, or whether there is a high population growth in urban areas than in rural areas compared to the previous period. But I think what is also important is that we do have other provinces that have less in terms of population. You look at Matabeleland, North, South, and Bulawayo, they don't have more in terms of the population size. But then Harare, I think, is on the top, I think contributing around 16% of the total population, followed by Manicaland around 13%, and also Marsh West at around 12%.
That's Tafadzwa Chikumbu. Our guest today is an economist, and we are unpacking the 2022 census. He has already given us the highlights of what came out of this census, and that is very useful for government and the stakeholders as they plan for the future, and also within the context of our devolution exercise, how are things going to be done going forward. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are looking at the 2022 census, what came out of it, and the way forward. And our guest is Tafadzwa Chikumbu, who has already given us the summary or the major highlights of what came out of the census. So with all these numbers changing like that, there had already been plans for decentralization and devolution. How is the country affected?
You note that the devolution agenda was introduced in the 2013 constitution, which came out a year after the previous census, which was done in 2012. And of course, it was actually important and good for the country to then plan with those statistics in mind. But I think we are now 9 years after the constitution came out, and we do not have a devolution plan as yet. And as we move forward with the devolution plans, I think the government now needs to make use of the current statistics, which is the statistics coming from the 2022 national budget, in terms of the distribution of the population. And also, I want to speak, for instance, in relation to the national budget consultations. With a population of 2.5 million for Harare, and also another population which is quite high in Manicaland and Marsh West, we don't expect to have the same number of budget consultations for Harare and also for Mutare and Bulawayo. So we expect the government to plan, or parliament when they plan, to have more consultations where there are more people, and also less consultations in terms of the number of consultations where there are less people. So the distribution of the budget consultations should actually mirror the population or the figures that appear in the current statistics. And the devolution agenda was also premised on the fact that we need to bridge the gap, both in terms of poverty and also in terms of addressing the infrastructure needs in each province or area. So with these current statistics, we actually know where the majority of the population is, and we also know where the majority of the poor people are. So the government interventions so far in terms of implementing devolution should actually be made with that in mind, so that where there are more gaps in terms of poverty levels, in terms of number of schools, in terms of numbers of hospitals, in terms of the infrastructure, they need to then focus more resources towards such districts and provinces.
Another important factor is just educating the public about the population census, which also included housing in this instant, so that they really understand what is at stake, because it's coming out in bits and pieces. Do you think it's important to actually go around and talking to the people about what came out of the census, so that as they plan together? Because right now, some of the sentiments that come out are political. When you tell people that there are no more people in this area and so forth, people take it otherwise.
Yeah, precisely. In any setting, it is very important that when you go to the public collecting information, you still need to go back and give them feedback. And this is a very important exercise. I know that it might be an expensive exercise to undertake, but in terms of governance, it's a very important process that the government should take back the information and actually disseminate it to the public, where they should know in their respective areas in terms of their distribution. You know, what I've also noted in the preliminary research findings is that the statistics have been disaggregated by ward. So they need to go back and actually share that in this particular ward we do have this number of people, and vis-a-vis the services that are within that area, they should actually know that probably out of the 28,000 people in a particular district, they do have one clinic. So what does it mean? Should we have more clinics? Is the infrastructure there enough? So that particular planning is very important, where citizens are also involved, especially in the context of the devolution agenda, which is well articulated in Chapter 14 of the Constitution, and the fact that citizens should participate in the development that involves them. They should actually know what obtains in terms of statistics, and also in terms of the kind of interventions that government should make.
Now let's look at the expectations of government with regards to the figures that are coming out in bits and pieces. Starting off maybe with regards to whether this time around government is likely to collect more revenue, considering that there's been an increase in the population, or it now depends on which population is increased.
Yeah, actually, government revenue depends on a number of factors. It depends on the level of economic activity in a country, but it also depends on the size of the population. Knowing that the bulk of our revenue is coming from indirect taxes, where people go and buy, we do a value-added tax, we have the 2% tax. So each transaction that is made by a particular individual, government actually accrues revenue from that. So an increase in population should automatically translate into an increase in revenue, especially in terms of indirect taxes, despite the fact that we do have other variables that needs to be considered, whether there is an increase in foreign direct investment, whether there is also an increase in domestic investment, and the type of investment that we have if it accrues additional revenue. But of course, an increase in population should actually also mirror an increase in revenue that should come from a country. But of course, this is an assumption holding other things, all the other things constant. And of course, knowing that the government of Zimbabwe actually gets more revenue from indirect taxes, I think they should also plan with that in mind. But I also want to mention that even when more revenue is actually being collected, they should also expect that there should be more expenditure that is also expected in terms of distributing the same revenue back to the citizens.
While more revenue is expected, there should also be more expenditure that should be expected. That's Tafadzwa Chikumbu, who is our guest today on the program. He's an economist and he's unpacking some of the results that we are getting from the 2022 census, just to see how government and other stakeholders, including industry, can use this information for planning as well as the country's development. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing the 2022 population census results. And we've got our guest here, who is Tafadzwa Chikumbu. He's an economist and he's helping us to unpack. We've dwelt very much on devolution. The other issue that is very important, especially as we discuss on Economic Forum, is investment. What are the investment opportunities that are likely to come up?
When information is made available, investors, they want to invest where there is information and where that information is well disaggregated, because they want to look at their target in terms of their customers. They also want to look at the target in terms of the distribution. Like I said, there are more people in Harare, So you might find more investors coming and investing in the same area simply because they rely on population, or population is a major variable for them. And also, if there's an area that is an increase in population, they might also be willing to move their investment to such respective areas. So I'll give you an example of a supermarket. In most cases, you only see supermarkets in towns, districts, and sometimes you don't see supermarkets in the growth points. But when population increases in specific areas, you might see bigger supermarkets coming to specific areas simply because the people have increased. But of course, like I said, there are so many variables that are that should be considered, especially when we look at investment. It also looks at the level of disposable income. I do hope and expect that as more results are coming out from the Zim stats, we are also able to look at the specifics in terms of people's disposable incomes, and also the number of people that are employed, those that are not employed. And then with that in mind, we can actually see more information that can be used by investors in making their decisions.
In planning, now using these census figures, do we also put that into mind that much as you might plan that these people are now settled here, they might decide to go back to where they came from?
The change might happen, but it might take longer for such a change to happen. And of course, when people settle, sometimes they settle there permanently, some they settle there temporarily. Like I said, if someone moves to a particular area to work, we expect probably that person to be in that area for a particular period of time. And those variables should actually be noted. And the census results should also be very specific in terms of that particular population, whether this person is there permanently, whether he's there as a visitor, or he was there as the census should be in a position to give us that disaggregated data, such that when government plans, they plan accordingly.
Infrastructure with regards to this census, where does the census take us to in terms of relooking our infrastructure? We've just been told that the capital city, has more people now, but the infrastructure that we have may not be for that number of people.
Yeah, actually, looking at the statistics and the figures, they should be used by different stakeholders, like I've said. And infrastructure, we are looking at both hardware and software in terms of infrastructure. There's infrastructure that involves buildings, houses, hospitals, schools. So the government, when they look at the number of schools that are in a particular area, they should actually look at the proportion of students in a particular school. They should also look at the distance that is traveled by people to those schools. The population density in Harare is different from population density in rural areas, such that you find too close schools in urban centers than in rural areas, simply because you might have more schools in rural areas, but then less people attending those schools. So the infrastructure that should come out should actually be well thought out in terms of the results. They should mirror the results of the census. And I'm very much concerned about health infrastructure, especially in rural areas. We do have very few hospitals, if any. We have very few clinics, and the government should actually look at that in terms of putting up additional infrastructure, especially in areas where there are now more people, so that the proportion of people that are being serviced by either a particular school, a particular hospital, or any other service that they might need is actually commensurate to the population that is in that particular area.
So just to wind up, a word about the importance of some of the questions that were being raised during the census and the results that we're seeing now. Because when the enumerators went round, there were lots of complaints about certain questions and why they were being asked. Now with the results coming out, as an economist, you can then allay the fears that it was because of government wanted to know this and that.
Yeah, precisely. You know, with census, people expected to just get questions in relation to probably
How
the
many
number
are
of
you?
people
Yes.
they are in a household. But I think, like I said, the information coming from a census will be used by different stakeholders. Like I said, including researchers, development partners, the government, civil society organizations, you know, at micro and macro level. So every dot or every source of information that has been sought will be very useful and will be used by the various stakeholders. You might take issues to do with, you know, the number of years people have been married. You know, there are people who are working in the social services sector. They need to know more in terms of that social information. There are also politicians. You know, when you know information about the number of people either in rural and urban areas, as a politician, you know where you should put your energies on to ensure that you get more votes.
Tafadzwa, do you think there was adequate information to the public so that they would fully understand what the census is about and some of the questions to expect?
Yeah, I think for any research that is carried out or where people want to extract information from the public, it is very important for those that carry out the exercise to fully inform the respondents in terms of the reason why they are asking certain information and also why that census is important for our country. That should not only happen at the point of collection of information. I think the government should have done much better in terms of disseminating information. And I'm sure there was information dissemination, but it was not enough. That should have probably reached each and every household, you know, by use of different modes of communication. You know, when people are not fully informed, they might not effectively participate and contribute to a particular process. So information dissemination remains a very key area.
Maybe you can mention some of the more effective channels of communication, considering that there are so many now, so that at the end of the day, Zimstats and government are sure that whatever they've disseminated has gone around the country.
Yeah, I think there's not been much use of social media. I think these days people rely more on social media, both in rural and urban areas. They could have done a lot of flyers and information packs that circulate on WhatsApp, on Facebook, and other social media platforms. And of course, the radio remains a very critical mode of communication for the rural population, especially in view of the community radios that we now have.
Well, Tafadzwa Chikumbu, I would like to thank you very much for coming on to Economic Forum.
Thank you so much, John.
That's Tafadzwa Chikumbu, an economist who came to Economic Forum to unpack the 2022 Census Population and Housing Survey in order for us to fully understand what came out of it. He gave us an overview, and the results are coming bit by bit, and Economic Forum will have that opportunity of bringing economists to explain that which will have been published by the government. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. If you've missed some of the episodes, you can watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of Tafadzwa Chikumbu, as well as the production crew, this is John Masuku.